As I was speaking there, you could probably tell by my facial expression, I was starting to get a little bit rushed with my lecture material, and that's because my phone was sending me signs and symbols that it was about to run out of memory, and it did, and suddenly it stopped recording. And so it influenced my behavior, and that's exactly what rhetorical analysis is all about. It's about signs and symbols, notifications on your phone in this case, in my case, affecting thoughts and behavior. And it actually can be traced back, rhetorical analysis, to ancient Greece. Ancient Greece with the rhetoricians, Aristotle, Plato. And ultimately, what we're looking at with the rhetorical analysis is the meanings that the audience arrives at. The meanings that the audience arrives at. That's what we're trying to get to. And the meaning is in the audience, as we circle back later and talk about in another method of viewing media. But let's take on the next method, and that's of a media messaging. We're still talking about media messaging here. That's cultural analysis. Cultural analysis focuses on how the texts embody and transmit ideology. It's a branch from Marxism. It does focus on ideology both explicitly as it occurs and also implicitly by doxa and all those other areas of knowledge that we just consider to be the truth. Like we're just assuming that the physicians that are speaking to us now and the people who are White House appointed medical professionals, that what they are telling us about vaccines and masks, et cetera, we just assume that's true. That's doxa. I mean, not necessarily. I'm not trying to blanket approach everybody and say that you just believe everything, but as a general trustworthy source, that's doxa knowledge. That's cultural analysis. Ideology is implicit in many cultures, and it is exposed by the media. And that's related to, but different from the next method, also fitting under media messages of analysis, called psychoanalytic analysis. Psychoanalytic analysis, where now we're focusing on the human drive and desire, particularly as it is in relation to media consumption. What drives us? What makes us desire to seek media, especially during these times? And a lot of it has to do with our bodily pleasures, that the media are supplying us with pleasures. They're titillating us, if I can use that double entendre term. Just think about the ways that your eyes are stimulated every time you look at a video game, for example. All the stimuli coming in through your eyes. And then you have your ears and your mouth and your nose, and nose not so much in media, but that's probably coming in the future as well. But media are trying to stimulate those sexual desires, and almost every single advertisement on television has some sexual component to it. And if you go through a magazine, probably the first 30 pages of the magazine are actually ads, and actually ads for something sexual. So we have a lot of this in our media content out there, this psychoanalytic analysis. And the next analysis picks up on it. Feminist analysis, also kind of messaging chunk of the chapter that we're looking at. The feminist analysis looks at how texts frame ideological categories of gender, about how gender is also ideologized, if you can say it that way, that the way that we think about gender has traditionally been binary, for example, and that there's a normal and a quote implied abnormal by the absence of discussing a counterpart to normal that is implied by the media. And that's what feminism is all about. It's one of the first perspectives that tries to disrupt media systems. It disrupts systems of analysis too, of sexism and patriarchal power. Those are the power that reaffirms the privileging of certain genders, the male gender, over transgender and female genders, and to the detriment of those people. And then the final perspective takes it even further. You could say queer analysis. Queer analysis, also a messaging analysis, focuses on how the texts normalize issues of sexuality. And this is also another disruptive perspective. It's trying to get that the elusive ambiguity that actually exists in sexuality, and that there is a lot of ambiguity, and that these binary types are either male with all these characteristics or female with all these characteristics. That's what the queer analysis is trying to break down, saying there's much more uncertainty in sexuality. And so now that takes us to the third big approach, the third big chunk of the chapter, which focuses on the audience when we're looking at media as media critics. That's what you are, a media critic now. We had reception analysis, where we're looking at the audience as the primary site where meaning is made, not in the organization, not in the text, it's in the person. And that actually the text may mean something completely different from what it was intended. And Chevy found this out when it went to sell the original Chevy Nova. You know the car, the Chevy Nova? They went to sell that in Mexico, and sales, they bombed. Why is that? because in Spanish, nova means no go. Okay, good example, no go, nova, but we didn't think about that. And so the meaning can be entirely different from what you intended, in this case, what Chevy intended. Next up, we had the sociological analysis. A sociological analysis is how audiences use media to manage interactions with others. And we are doing that more than ever today. The book comes so far short on what we are using media for right now during this pandemic to get by, how we are organizing our relations, reorganizing our relations, organizing your studies. Many of you will be beginning class on Monday, regular class. You have no idea what that means. There are many assignments that are assigned. My classes have some of those assignments included where students have to work together. The relations between students in groups and interpersonally are fundamentally changed right now. And will they ever revert to the way they were before? That only time will tell. But that's what sociological analysis is for, is looking at how the device that you're holding in your hand probably the rest of the day after you do your coursework for this class, or even during your coursework, and what does that mean for your life to be so tied to the phone and to have your virtual world now be the primary world by which you're interacting with people? That's something that you're going to be an expert on, like it or not, because you're living it. Now we're on to the next perspective, which was erotic analysis. The erotic analysis, understanding how pleasure is a powerful force that drives us to media consumption. Let's just flat out say that that's why pornography is so explosive on the web. You can even say that pornography led the technology of the web. Sure, it was the porn sites that were trying to figure out first how to get people to download videos very fast. And so this is a thriving industry, and particularly here in the United States. But there are other kinds of pleasures that we get from our media as well. We get coupons, which give us the pleasure of purchasing things. And a lot of the things that we purchase have a sensual quality to them, especially if they're things that we're eating. There is a sensual quality to that. And a lot of the media content is focused on eating. And there is a lot of sexual crossover innuendo in the way that we eat food and the way that we perform text. So there is some similarity there. We discussed during this that there are certain texts that are writerly texts. Those are texts that allow audiences to have unique pleasures if they are willing to do the work to fill in the gaps, to fill in what the wink and the nod is that's going on. And then finally, we did the last analysis for this class, the last analysis on its own. It was an ecological analysis, looking at the environment around us and considering that media are not just equipment that are around us, like the TV in the corner, the computer that's plugged in, the cell phone charger next to your bed, but actually media are our environment because we're spending so much time in them now, especially right now, as I've tried to highlight throughout this course, as we've been social distancing with ourselves, but not on social media, right? Social media, is that an oxymoron, right? Social, does that mean really getting together ultimately with a person? And is social media an oxymoron? Do those two words contradict each other? Or is social distancing really what we're doing using social media? So ecological analysis looks at our environment, and it tries to distinguish between the world that we live in now as being different from the oral world which used to exist, and the way that people's thought processes existed because they lived in an oral world prior to the alphabet, prior to the newspaper. And then we looked at the literate world, the world as it existed after writing, and how that made us think in a certain way, a certain linear way. And now we're in this whole new world which nobody really knows what it is. It's a collage. It's a world of associative meanings. There's bits and pieces around us all the time. That's for you to figure out as a burgeoning scholar. So now let's move to wrapping up this chapter and the book and the content for the course. We want to talk about a key concept here, which is media literacy. We hope that you now have media literacy. Literacy is not just the ability to read and write. We're using it much more metaphorically here when we're talking about the media, that you have the ability to read the code of media now, that you have the ability to find the code in there that you didn't know was there. It's it's like learning Latin as the root of some of the English words that you're speaking. You've learned the code. And you understand now how media function. You understand how media and the way that they operate has a bearing on the average person's daily life. You understand the logic and the powers, in essence, of media. And that's why we have college courses in this subject. So what can be done? If you're not satisfied with the way things are, you're not satisfied with the status quo, there's two ways to think about your options as we look towards the future. One is culture jamming, as the book discussed it. Culture jamming, that's basically trying to disrupt the system, just like some of the perspectives that you've been looking at have been disrupting the system. Are you familiar with The Onion? The Onion, which is a satirical, it used to be a magazine in the Washington, D.C. area, newspaper magazine, I should say. Now it's an online satire. It's like Saturday Night Live. You can say Saturday Night Live. It does that same function when it parodies the White House. It tries to disrupt the system. When Saturday Night Live portrayed Sean Spicer, the original secretary of Donald Trump, and it used a female to portray, a female cast member to portray a male press secretary, that was trying to disrupt the system. That just for some people, that Sean Spicer was said not to have been able to handle it. That's an example of culture jamming. And a lot of times parody is the basis for jamming the culture. Sometimes the only way you can get people to accept your ideas if you can kind of say, hey, it was a joke, right? I'm winking a nod and I have my tongue in my cheek. There's an organization that does this all the time. Look it up on your own. It's called Adbusters. Adbusters, that's an organization that tries to use the conventions of advertising to bust up the hegemonic, remember that word, hegemony? It's an ideology that eats up other ideologies, to bust up the hegemonic powers of advertisers. And that's a thought that I'm going to let you think about on your own. And that takes us to our final idea for the course, which is media reform. You may not find yourself in a position right now to implement media reform, but at some point you might be a board member of some company, you might be on some quasi-government committee, you might even be a media regulator at some point, a media manager, any of those as well as more, you might be in a position to make big wholesale change. So media reform is any effort by citizens to change the structure and the operation of the mass media industries. And a lot of the focus has been on alternative media outlets, people establishing YouTube channels, people establishing really all the manner in which people can create their content and distribute it today using your phone. All the clouds that are out there, all the apps that are out there. I mean, you can create your own stuff today. So the alternative media outlets, those are not controlled by really big companies. The ones that are actually trying to go outside of the non-risk taking that big companies take to try and produce original new content that we need to hear from. That's what we need. And that the focus should be on media policy and regulation. For example, why today is there still such a restrictive atmosphere on broadcasters for obscenity? Why are they not allowed to swear like streaming media are? I bet the audiences are getting close to each other. There's a lot of reasons for that philosophically, which can't go into now, but that's a question that's worth considering, right? We have so many, we even have, our president is swearing all the time. Why can't media swear? Okay, and then finally, has been the development of small media in this country, small broadcasting media, I should say, low power FM radio stations, low power FM TV stations, where otherwise the market was crowded, there wasn't any room for them on the broadcast band. Now we have these kinds of ways of allowing little bits and pieces of communities to create their own content and be alternative to the mainstream media. Never thought I'd be using those words, mainstream media. All right, that brings us to the end of this course. I do now hope that you consider yourself to be a media critic, because you are. Have a great day and a great rest of the semester.